Well, public confidence in the South African police services is on a downward spiral. Research by the Human Sciences Research Council shows a strong decline of trust in police by the public between 1989 and 2021. Over the years, the SAPS have come under the spotlight for several issues relating to instability within the leadership structure and generally failure to effectively enforce law and maintain safety in the country. For more on this, we speak to Senior Research Specialist in the Developmental, Capable and Ethical State Research Division at the Human Sciences Research Council, Dr. Stephen Gordon. Dr. Gordon, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving attention to an extremely important issue in democratic South Africa.
Absolutely. Talking about the research, it does show that the issue of police legitimacy is not a new one in this country. Less than half of the adult population indicated any kind of trust in the police over the last 23 years. And so my question to you, Dr. Gordon, why do we have such low levels of public trust in the police?
When the South African police services first came into being, they faced an extremely difficult task to transform themselves from the impressive institution of their predecessor into the democratic, transformative institution of a modern democracy. They unfortunately were not able to win public trust. Indeed, if we look at public opinion analysis gathered by the Human Science Research Council over the last 23 years, at no point was SAPS able to gain the trust of more than half the population. However, in the last few years, high-profile failures by SAPS have negatively impacted on public trust. Currently, in 2021, which we have the latest data for, trust in SAPS is at 27% of the adult population, the lowest it has been in 23 years. Now, there are a number of factors contributing to low levels of trust, but primarily we have to look at large-scale police failures to respond to issues of concern to the general public. In particular, the large-scale social unrest of July of last year.
You know, Dr. Gordon, you've mentioned that we've had these seminal moments, these high-profile, large-scale events where the police really failed the South African public. You've mentioned the July civil unrest of last year, certainly one that is still fresh in our minds. But we also had the Marikana massacre in August of 2012, where we saw police action there fail a number of individuals. In fact, today we commemorate that particular massacre every year on that particular day. And I wonder, how did that further, I suppose, worsen the relationship between the South African public and police, those particular large-scale events?
Well, you are correct. You know, trust in the police plummeted after Marikana, reaching new lows. Now, over the subsequent years, the public's faith in the police was somewhat restored, particularly by the launch of some police actions in certain provinces to try and address crime. However, it still remains very, very low, and much of that work appears to be undone in the last year. So these high-scale police failures have an important effect on public confidence in the police, not just affecting, say, the province or the locality in which they occurred, but trust in a very general and national sense. Indeed, moments like Marikana, the kind of police brutality that we saw, I think reminds South Africans too much of the bygone eras of oppression and builds distrust between the police and the general public. You know, this is not the first time that the Human Science Research Council has looked at public attitudes towards the police. You know, we have found that large shares of the general public worry that the police do not share their values. They worry that the police treat ordinary people unfairly, particularly the poor, and are concerned that the police are inefficient in protecting them and providing them with security.
Dr. Gordon, talking about those inefficiencies, we know that the police service is one that is heavily under-resourced. The police-to-population ratio is one that we cannot be proud of when we talk about how to one police officer, hundreds of South Africans are expected to be serviced. How much of a contributing factor is that to the inefficiency, the ineffectiveness of policing in this country?
You raise a very, very important point. Sometimes it is not so much the demonstration of force more than it is the effectiveness of that force in bringing crime levels down and increasing security. So a good example is the Western Cape, which substantial resources were devoted to combat gangsterism. And initially, the public in the Western Cape responded favorably to these interventions, and trust in the police following them increased. The failure of these interventions to provide meaningful levels of security, however, in many parts of the Western Cape, led to a backlash that we saw last year. Trust in the police in the Western Cape has fallen 20% between 2020 and 2021. So again, while resources are very, very important, the goal is outcome. Sufficient outlay of resources without achieving security will, in the long run, lead to a public backlash in a sense that the police are unable to effectively service ordinary South Africans.
One thing, Dr. Gordon, oftentimes when we do pay attention to what's happening in the police service, it is often of a political nature. We're often looking at what's happening between the political head of the South African Police Force, be in the form of the police minister, and we're often looking at what's happening in terms of the operational head in the form of the National Police Commissioner and the squabbles there within the leadership struggles. And I wonder how much of an influence that is having in the public's ability to trust in the police. We often talk about the old adage that the fish rots from the head. And so if we're seeing so much instability at the top, surely that also feeds into our perceptions of the force itself.
No, absolutely. And indeed, one can think about issues related to corruption, police inefficiency, the ignoring of police intelligence as being emblematic of some of the wider problems we see with policing in South Africa. You know, the Institute for Security Studies has recently proposed a raft of recommendations for reforming the police in South Africa, including dealing with the extremely hierarchical structure of police authority and organizational command, advocating for a much more community-driven, decentralized form of security provision, and moving away from the command and control structure which was so prevalent during the apartheid regime. That being said, South Africans as a people respond quite well to strong aggressive action, particularly if that strong aggressive action leads to results. They are very, very keen for the South African police services to provide them with a level of protection. We must remember that many South Africans, ordinary South Africans, rich, poor, young, old, feel unsafe. They feel unsafe walking around their neighborhood at night. They feel unsafe walking around their neighborhood during the day. In a democratic society, that is just not acceptable.
Well, Dr. Gordon, thank you so much for your time. You certainly have given us some interesting insights there as we take a look at the police service. And I wonder what our viewers make of this idea of a more decentralized approach to policing in the country. For now,